Welcome back to the Astrocast. I'm your host, Drew. Today is Tuesday, November 12th, 2024. We are about 3/4 of the way through a waxing gibbous moon. We will be to the full moon in no time, which means we will soon be on our way back to new moon goodness. That's how I always like to think of it anyway. New moon goodness. Interesting time of year because I find myself messing with the dual narrowband filters less and less as we get into the winter months, because I find that there are less targets that are really receptive to the dual narrowband system, as I like to think of it with my Rokinon 135. But it does open up a whole host of new possibilities with the winter constellations starting to properly come into view just shortly after, 10, 11 o'clock, depending on where you are. It seems like we're in for a pretty good night of imaging as of late with the winter stuff. So hope you guys have been well. It's been fairly cloudy in Charlotte for the last week. I haven't gotten an opportunity to get my scopes out, which is unfortunate. And that seems to be the case with a lot of our listeners. I've heard from many people that it's been cloudy everywhere that they've been as well. Certainly in the Discord chat that we have for the Astrocast, a lot of us are dealing with clouds. But I think one of our group members said that they had nice clear skies and sent some awesome shots, which is always appreciated. Good to see somebody can get some nice night sky out there. I had a bad situation come up recently in our neighborhood. As you may know, if you're a longtime listener of the show, I've got a little dark area in our neighborhood, as I like to think of it, because I always keep all my lights off out front, and my neighbor's usually pretty good about keeping his lights off as well. But unfortunately, the city came through recently and did some local repairs on some of our street lights, and a street light that is about one driveway down from my house in a typical suburb neighborhood has now been repaired. Luckily it's a yellow light, so it's not as offensive to the eye, but unfortunately it is extremely bright. So it's just really ruined a lot of the stargazing that I can typically do from my front yard, which is of obvious concern to me because I do most of my imaging from my front yard. But after kind of sulking about for a few days, for lack of better words, I decided to check out the side yard location again that I had pondered on. And I kind of waited for Orion to get up high enough to where, I can get a decent view of the southern skies and what they look like above, 30 degrees where you'd normally want to image from anyway. And I seem to have a fairly good view of the night sky. I might not be getting quite as much on the western side, but that's obviously not as important to me. I've never had a great view of low southern horizons, even when I was, able to set up from the driveway. So I'm not really missing out on anything there. I think I might actually be gaining a little bit more visibility of the northern skies, which is nice. So the plan is to set up there. Actually, I might set up tonight because it looks like it's going to be a clear night, although the moon is out. And as I said a few moments ago, it's very bright at, 75% right now. So I'll have to see how that goes. But the plan is to go ahead and pour the pier over there because I wasn't able to secure a pad at the local club yet. I don't know if or when that will be happening. If it does, obviously I will jump at that opportunity, but not looking great thus far. So definitely going to go ahead and move forward with the pier in my side yard. And my fence is tall enough. I got a, 6-foot wooden fence. It should be able to block out the majority of that light. And as long as I don't bring my telescope up too high, which I wouldn't do anyway, it should leave me in a fairly decent position to where I'll be able to block out most of that light. And I've even considered maybe putting up some slightly higher edges on the fences. I don't know exactly how I'll do that. I'm trying to think of different ways without just clamping plywood up there or whatever god awful idea comes to mind first. But maybe make it a little bit higher in that one section where that light is, just so I can block it out from my eye line a little bit better. And if I can pull that off, I'll have just as good a sky as I had before, really. So fingers crossed that I can make that happen. And I will certainly update you guys when I have more info in that regard. Now, in astronomy news, or should I say astrophotography news, I actually saw there's a pretty cool new device coming out. And you guys may or may not be the actual target audience for a device like this. But I don't know, maybe you are. The Seestar S30 is actually going to be shipping pretty soon. It looks like this November, the pre-order started, and then looks like most of the U.S. realtors will begin receiving them in early to mid-December for shipping them out. And basically what ZWO has done here is taken their original S50 smart telescope and just made it a whole lot smaller. Like if you see an image of the two beside each other, it's kind of night and day as in terms of overall size. So this thing it's really tiny, and it only weighs 3.6 pounds. So pretty darn small. 3.6 pounds. The dimensions are, let's see, about 8 inches by 6 inches by 3 inches. So it's almost small enough where you could fit it in a pair of, big jean pockets. If you were wearing some Jinkos or something along those lines, you'd be able to back pocket this telescope. It's got a really good built-in battery. The specs, I feel like they leave a little bit to desire. But I mean, what do you expect with a smart telescope that only costs $350? You're not looking for, top of the line optics or anything like that. You're just looking for something that can take a really cool picture and go, wow, look, there's the Orion Nebula or something along those lines. And for that, these absolutely deliver. So I'm still personally on the fence as to whether or not something like this should be recommended as a first telescope. I know that is absolutely what ZWO is hoping to capture in terms of the market share. But I don't personally agree with that, because I feel like if you get an actual telescope with an actual mount, you will learn so much more about astronomy and the night sky than you would with something like a Seestar. Then again, that's easy for me to say whenever I can, afford to build a nicer telescope setup. But even at $350, why don't we do a little mental exercise here and see if we could build maybe a secondhand rig that's only $350 to $500, and see if we can build something that could potentially compete or even do better than the Seestar. So the short answer is no, you cannot. But the slightly more in-depth answer is that you can get pretty darn close for about the same amount of money. So what I did to figure this out was I actually went to mpb.com, which is a website that is not a partner with the Astrocast, by the way. But they sell used photography gear at MPB, and I bought from them on a couple different occasions. I actually bought my Rokinon 135, and I believe my Rokinon 14 millimeter from there as well. I got really good deals on them. And if you look around, camera lenses tend to hold their value very well. They're a good investment as far as, hobby products go, and that they very much hold their value. But that being said, depending on what you're looking for, you can certainly find a very, very good deal on things like camera lenses and cameras if you're willing to look around a little bit. So that's kind of what MPP does. You would ship them your lens, they inspect it, they give it a rating, whether that be just for parts all the way up to like new, and a lot of different categories in between. And then they also take photos of all of the pieces that they're selling. So you have a pretty good idea of what you're buying. So using that site, I typed in kind of the basics that you would need camera wise to get started. So I figure a Rebel T5 and a Canon 18-135 lens. So if we went with a setup like that for the camera, and then included a simple star tracker, the Move Shoot Move in this case, because it is the most inexpensive among all the star trackers, and then a basic newer, and I say newer, NEEWER, the brand newer tripod for $70 on Amazon. So In total, it comes out to $569. So that would get you a camera, a lens, a move, shoot, move star tracker, and then a tripod to set it all up on. Now, the obvious benefit of buying a system like this instead of something like the $500 S50 is that you get an actual camera that you can use for daytime photography as well. If you start looking at astrophotography specifics, though, that's where this kind of starts to fall apart, because the Seestars do have a lot of different features built into them that are astrophotography centric. I'm not sure about the sensors, but I would imagine that they are, for lack of better words, astro-modified, that they don't have the UV-IR cut filters on them, because why would they include them on a custom-made device? Whereas something like a Canon Rebel that you buy on MPB or from Best Buy or wherever you get it is going to have that UV-IR cut filter in, which is going to block out a lot of the pretty reds that we like to pick up in nebula. You're also losing out on a lot of the automated functionality. If you're using something like a tripod with a star tracker on it, you have to be able to find the target that you're looking for, which, again, not a bad thing, because it encourages you to learn constellations and to learn how to star hop to different targets. But, depending on how excited you are about getting into the hobby of astronomy, you may or may not want to actually do that. You might want to just press a button and say, I want a really cool picture of Andromeda. And obviously there's no comparison between the two. If I were just starting out today, though, I would 100% go with a Rebel and a star tracker over something like a Seestar, just because me personally, I would rather take the photos myself. Another thing I saw about the Seestar that I really didn't like to see was that they're apparently using some type of AI upscaling for their images. So like on the product page, if you look on High Point Scientific, they have a photo where it shows that it's a stellar to stunning with AI with a super ED powered set of triplet APO optics, Starvis 2 image sensor, and powerful live stacking algorithm. The Seestar telescope provides Anyway, it gets to, as ZWO has packed in AI image enhancement with the S30, allowing you to minimize noise and maximize the impact of your photos. Now, if that is just AI denoising, I don't really see a problem with that, because we all probably use that in post anyway. And if you look closely at the photos that it's providing, I mean, I would say, if I had to go with my gut on this, I would say it's essentially doing a lot of the different stuff that we kind of manually do in PixInsight already. Blur exterminator, noise exterminator, a little bit of stretching here and there, just looking at the image. I'm not a big fan of, I don't know. I'm looking at the images. You guys tell me if you get a chance to look at it. Let me know what you think. If you have thoughts on these smart telescopes, I'd love to hear them. Like I say, it's a very, very awesome thing that they've made a device that's only $350 that lets people see the cosmos. I cannot fault them for that. But the purist in me also is just kind of like, man, oh man, it's this easy now where all you do is just you go outside and set it on your driveway and press a button, and then 15 minutes later you're downloading images of the moon or whatever it is that you're looking at through your Seestar. So anyway, moving on from that, if you do have thoughts on the new Seestar S30, please feel free to email them to me. You can reach me at rooastrocast@gmail.com. So I'll certainly be looking forward to hearing from you. I'm sure I'll see one of them at some point. Anytime I'm out at the observatory, I usually run into one or two people who have smart telescopes, and I have no doubt that I'll eventually run into somebody with an S30 and I'll ask them about it, as I always do. I will say I like that those come with sun filters. So they always come with filters, if I'm not mistaken, the S30 and the S50. I would assume the S30 does as well, because it says you can take photos of the sun with it. And that's really cool, because that's not something that I've actually done with my telescope yet, is get a solar filter and hook it up and all that. Honestly, I haven't read too much on solar imaging. I probably should, because a lot of the photos that I see look incredible, But at the same time, I know that if you want to really get into solar imaging, that you need a pretty nice solar scope from what I'm remembering. Wow, those have actually come a long way too. I guess I didn't hear about these new Lunt telescopes that are out. If you guys haven't seen them, it looks like they make a 40 millimeter version of their H alpha solar telescopes now, and only $850, which, don't get me wrong, that's still expensive, but I mean, here's one for $750, and it says they build them to order, so you have to actually order one for them to get it. But compared to what Lunt was selling their other scopes for that were H alpha only, which was, $3,000 and up, from what I remember, that's one heck of a deal. So maybe the solar scopes are starting to come down in price quite a bit now too. So definitely something to think about if you want to view some of those beautiful prominences and sunspots and what have you. That certainly is an option as well. I don't think I'll be doing any solar imaging anytime soon, but it is something that I'll undoubtedly get to one of these days. So what are you guys' plans for winter targets? I've been trying to think of what I want to do this winter. And obviously I want to do all the, the favorites or greatest hits, whatever you want to call them, the Pleiades. And, obviously I want to do the Orion Nebula and what have you. But I've yet to decide on a real winter project that I want to put, several nights worth of work into. I'm considering doing M42, but if I do it, I want to probably do a wider field version, where I could hopefully get some of Barnard's Loop. Sorry, the name escaped me. And actually, the night escaped me. I had to step away last night. I don't know if you could tell, but I just was not feeling it last night. I was kind of phoning it in. So right there where I said I hopefully can get some of, I actually stepped away. And I'm glad that I did, because I never, ever, ever want to feel like I'm phoning it in on the show, because it's really important to me. And I want you guys to understand that I am passionate about, this project. And every once in a while, when you're in those kind of moods, it's good to step away, because you're never going to be putting your best foot forward in any of your work if you're not in the right headspace to do it. Luckily, I am very much in the right headspace because of what ended up happening last night after I stepped away. So it was all day long in the forecast. It had said it was going to be cloudy, and I went outside shortly after recording the first half of the episode, and it was very, very clear out. So it was an excellent opportunity for me to kind of test out my new situation, being that I can't really set up in the driveway anymore, and I'm looking to hopefully pour that pier over this weekend if all goes as planned. And I actually did a little bit of measurements too, and I could fit a small building in the corner of my yard. I'll put up a photo on Facebook of the area that I'm working with. I took a photo last night of my, I pulled out my Star Adventure GTI and Rokinon 135 rig and set that up. And I actually shot Orion for quite a while last night. So it came up and the moon was out, so it wasn't ideal conditions by any means, but I figured it'd be fun to do like an HDR composite of Orion. And this is kind of leading me back to what I was talking about earlier with a really good project to do. And one thing I could suggest to you guys, if you're looking to do something cool for astrophotography this winter, do Orion, but try it a little bit different. If you're experienced at all in shooting Orion, you probably know all about people saying, don't blow out the core, don't blow out the core. But there's just as much, delicate, faint dust in the surrounding area around Orion, and even the Horsehead Nebula, if you want to go super wide, like I did last night, the 135 millimeter lens. But regardless, if you go super wide or tighter, like a, 400 millimeter shot, somewhere in that range where you get, Orion and the Running Man Nebula taking up the whole frame, it's a good idea to do what is called an HDR composite shot. And it's a composite because we're combining multiple photos of different exposure lengths to end up with one, great photo at the end of the day that's able to showcase all the different brightnesses essentially across the entire nebula region. So by doing this, what you get is you get the dimmer stuff within the Orion Nebula, as well as the brighter items, such as the core of the actual nebula. And the way that you actually would do it, it's pretty simple. And most people probably will be like, duh, why didn't I think of that if you don't already know how to do it? But I think a lot of people, they don't try it for whatever reason. And I'm here to tell you, after last night programming it into the ASI Air, it is so simple. You have no excuses not to try to take an HDR composite. And if you don't want to do it of Orion, maybe find a different nebula that has similar circumstances where you've got, very bright features in one area and then very delicate features in another. One that comes to mind immediately for me that could really benefit from this method would be the Pleiades, because obviously the Pleiades has, very beautiful bright stars that we can capture in broadband RGB color. But then we also have those very faint, delicate dust waves that surround the actual cluster that, you're really good, long 10-hour plus images generally showcase quite well. So that would be a good one for an HDR composite as well. But it's quite simple how you're actually going to do it. So what you'll want to do is if you're using Nina, you can follow along just the same way. Essentially, when you set up your plan for your targets, whether it be Nina or ASI Air, you just want to add multiple shots of Orion at varying lengths, and you want to really get a lot of different lengths within. So what I did is I think I did 5 or 6 different image lengths or shutter lengths. I started with a 1-second exposure. I did 10 of those. I did 10 5-second exposures. I did 10 10-second exposures, and then I did 10 30-second exposures, and then I did 10 60-second exposures, and then finally I did 10 180-second exposures. So basically I'm covering the full gamut from a 1-second shot all the way up to a 3-minute shot and kind of everything in between. So the difference between 60 seconds and 180 seconds on a target like Orion is just really how much of that extra faint dust that you're going to pick up is going to be, on the outer edge. But that being said, you could just as easily say, I'm just going to do 60-second exposures. It kind of depends on what your night sky conditions are like and what kind of lens you're using. But I will say, even with the moon out last night, I had my L Pro filter on, my little 1 1/4 inch one. I had it right in front of the sensor window for my ASI 294. And it worked out really well. I got really good colors on everything. I'm a big fan of the L Pro filter. I know everybody loves talking about the dual narrowband extreme type filters, and they're great. Don't get me wrong. I love a good narrowband filter just as much as the next person, but I am here to tell you that winter in the northern hemisphere, a lot more broadband targets that we're working with. And as we work our way towards galaxy season, inevitably in the spring, if you want to shoot galaxies, you will not be doing it in narrowband if you want to be able to pick up that very delicate faint light that is coming from, in some cases, hundreds of millions of light years away. So think about investing in an L Pro or, whatever type of broadband light pollution filter you like. They're able to basically cut out a lot of the pollution and gradients that we experience from city lights and moonlight. Like I say, in my experience, even with the moon being up, and I believe it was at least a third of the night sky. It was, I was imaging in the east and the moon was well into the west, nearing the tree line. So, I'm guessing at least 40 degrees away from where my target was. But it looked really well on those images. I haven't gotten a chance to actually sit down and put it together yet as a finished image yet. I'll probably do that over this weekend. And I will post it up to the Astrocast Facebook page if you guys want to check it out after I'm done editing that image. Now, one thing about that is I probably could use more overall integration time because, doing the 10 shots of 1 second, 5 second, 10 second, 30 second, etc. is great, but it doesn't give you a ton of overall imaging time. So what you would probably want to do if you wanted to do something similar to what I did, but actually get like a really good photo at the end of the day, is I would be probably a lot happier doing maybe 20 shots of each one of the shorter length ones, and then doing just as much time as you possibly can for the really long shots, whatever you go with. If it's 60 seconds or 2 minutes or 3 minutes or even more, I would do as much time as you can on that. So, you know, like me, I usually stick to around 4 hours for an image. That's just me. I know a lot of people would laugh if if you told them you only do 4 hours on an image. And that's something I am going to try to change over this winter. And, you know, like I was talking about earlier, do some longer projects that are a lot more time than that, multi-night images. I want to give that a try. But nonetheless, I would probably spend like, you know, half an hour of my overall imaging time on the HDR composite part of those shots. And then the rest of my time would all go towards just the long exposures to get as much of that nebulosity and gas in the area that we can. And then when you go to actually combine them, you know, I'd be really curious to hear people's different thoughts on combining HDR composite images, because I know that there are a lot of different techniques that I've read about. But for me personally, I like to go with PixInsight's HDR composition tool. I feel like once you figure out how it works, and it's a pretty simple tool to use overall, and compared to all the other types of tools that we use within PixInsight, that is a really great way to go. I did find a guide on HDR composition with PixInsight. It's on a website called deepskycolors.com. I stumbled across it when I was doing a little bit of research for the episode, and I will put that in the show notes if you guys want to check it out. And the author basically goes through and lays out exactly how he does an HDR composition. And he's actually using the Orion and Horsehead Nebula in a very similar to move to what I was doing. I didn't realize that was the case whenever I pulled this up, but indeed it is. So definitely worth checking that out. Shout out to Deep Sky Colors. I don't know. I haven't looked at this website before, but it looks pretty interesting. Definitely nice. So definitely check that one out if you want to get that guide to HDR composition. Of course, you can always go on YouTube. There's a million different guides and a million different ways to do it, of course. The only thing that I'm kind of concerned about is flat reproduction. I thought about, am I going to need to do different flats for the different parts of the composition, or just do the flats once? And I suppose what I would do if, when I do this, because I ended up with flats at the end of the night, I think I can apply the same flat to all of the images and then stack them. I'm not entirely sure. You know what, guys? I will report back on that in next week's episode whenever I find the best way to go about handling it, because obviously with different exposure lengths, you would technically need different dark lengths. Though I'm thinking hopefully I'll be able to get away with just using the 180-second darks, because I would imagine any noise that is present in a dark at 60 seconds is also going to be there at 180 seconds, though I could be wrong. My gut says that more than likely we can get away with one set of darks for something like that, and also with applying the flats, because ultimately the flats are there to, you know, remove dust and vignetting, etc. And that's going to happen regardless of the length of the shot. In other non-astrophotography news, I actually had a really cool experience last weekend. It's something I've been looking forward to doing for a very long time, and it finally came around. We have a raptor center here in Charlotte, North Carolina. And for those of you who don't know, raptors are birds of prey, owls, hawks, falcons, etc. Any bird that eats meat is considered a raptor, that hunts for meat. And we have the Carolinas Raptor Center here in Charlotte, North Carolina. It's actually in Huntersville, just slightly north of the city. And they do a lot of awesome outreach with the community, and they help a lot a lot of local birds who get injured, and they actually bring in other birds from other countries as well that need to be rehabilitated. And anyway, a couple times a year, they have a event that is called Photo Wild, and they sell a very limited number of tickets to photographers to come in and get up close and personal with all of the birds. And it was finally this weekend. So I was even surprised that I got to go, because whenever I heard about this, I had planned to buy my tickets, well in advance and set an alarm and everything. I might have talked about this on last week's episode. Forgive me if I did. But anyway, I ended up not getting a ticket. And then by a small miracle, I ended up scoring one at not even the last minute. After the last minute, somebody opened up an extra ticket for me and I was able to get one. So I went to the Photo Wild shoot and had a absolutely awesome time there. It was really cool. I was hanging out with 30 other photographers were there. And 30 seems like a lot, but big outdoor area that we were working in. And I really like the fact that they don't oversell it, because if there were 50 or 60 photographers, that would start getting a little bit silly, and everybody would kind of be getting in each other's way and those sorts of things. But I spent probably a good 3 hours there taking shots of all the different owls and hawks, and they brought out a kestrel, which is a really cool bird. It's actually the smallest raptor in America. If you're curious, you can look them up. It's kestrel with a K, Kestrel. And I know that you guys know that birding is another hobby of mine outside of astronomy and astrophotography. And I just wanted to point it out, because obviously the two kind of mix in some ways, and that we practice our photography during the daytime on birds, and then we practice our photography on the nighttime on the cosmos. So anytime that a special event comes up with birds, I always like to mention it. So if you want to check out any of those shots, I'll be sure to share some of them on the Astrocast website, or you can always check me out on Instagram there as well. And let me know what you think. I definitely enjoyed it, and really, really cool that the Carolinas Raptor Center does that. Check them out. So last week we were talking about Martin, shout out again, Martin, and he had written in a question about getting back into astrophotography and, what kind of gear he had. And I made a lot of suggestions to Martin on what would be a good place to get started. And later on in the Discord chat that we have for members of the Astrocast Society, which if you'd like to join is available at patreon.com/the Astrocast. Anyway, add over. One of our members had mentioned Stellarium, and I realized I don't think I brought up all of Stellarium's functionality, if I talked about it at all. During that portion of the show, when I was talking about the various tools that can be used. And he actually mentioned, I think it was Sarah who mentioned it, the tools within Stellarium, first of all, are second to none in terms of like planetarium software that is available for free online. They're just absolutely phenomenal in that they'll let you see anything and everything in the night sky. You can program custom landscapes, and actually I did talk about all that, but the one thing that I did not mention, which is absolutely crucial and worth mentioning to anybody who's interested in it, particularly someone who is getting back in to astrophotography and maybe has 2 or 3 lenses and they want to know which one would be the best. There's actually a feature right in the top right-hand corner when you open up Stellarium that will let you enter in or pick from. They have a lot of built-in ones right off the bat. Various cameras, telescopes, lenses, and even eyepieces. And what it does for you is it allows you to say, okay, I have a Canon Rebel APS-C camera, and I've got a 50 millimeter lens. What is my field of view going to look at when I'm aiming at Orion, for example? So Martin had asked that, and I forgot to mention it to him. And that's a really good thing to mention, because he wanted to know specifically, what sort of things he could go after with the lenses that he had. He had a couple of kit lenses, and then he had the 50 millimeter. I had suggested using the 50 because I know generally speaking, those have faster apertures, which means that they gather a lot more light more quickly than something, like a zoom lens that comes with your camera would generally do. And looking in here, if you were using like a Canon Rebel along with a 50 millimeter lens, you end up with a view that essentially, depending on how you rotate the lens, you can darn near get all of Orion in one shot, which honestly I think would be pretty awesome. And by all, I mean you can get from Rigel all the way up to Betelgeuse and everything in between, and then Bellatrix and Saiph in the top and bottom corners of the image. So if you can imagine kind of all of Barnard's loop going around Orion's belt, which would be in the middle, and then below the belt, you would have, the Orion Nebula, the Horsehead and Flame Nebula, and all of that. Then that's the kind of image that you would get. And in fact, if you line it up just right, you can actually get the Witchhead Nebula in that shot too. So in the bottom right-hand corner, depending on which way you're looking at it, you could actually get the whole Witchhead Nebula. So honestly, that looks like an awesome shot. It honestly something that I wouldn't mind taking a stab at, just looking at the framing of it all, because like I say, all of Barnard's loop in there, all of obviously the Orion Nebula, the entire belt, the whole constellation of Orion really is visible to you in this shot. And then if you can pick up all those other pieces like the Witchhead Nebula, for example. And this is just a perfect example of using HDR, because you would definitely want to do, some different length shots and then combine them in different ways to experiment with. Because if you were going to do a project this big, I would imagine you'd probably take a few attempts at, processing the actual image. But going ahead and doing that, I think you would be quite happy with the results. But yeah, so anyway, download Stellarium. I will put a link in the show notes for you to give that a try. It's absolutely free. There are a ton of extra features that you can turn on. I will say, for beginners, Stellarium can be a little bit confusing at first because it's got so many features within, but you wouldn't really know that just looking at the basic user interface. Just know that in the bottom left-hand corner, when you move your mouse down there, on the left-hand side and on the bottom side, there are two pop-up menus. And if you kind of just look around there, you can see a lot of what there is to offer. A couple of things I will mention. Turning on the HIPS survey is a really awesome feature because it actually puts essentially real images on the backdrop of all the various, nebula, deep space objects, galaxies, etc. And those will become apparent to you. And, I was zooming in on Barnard's loop here from that 50 millimeter shot, and I realized there's a whole other nebula, the Casper the Friendly Ghost Nebula, which is just to the east of the Flame Nebula, is right there too. So really there are like so many awesome targets within one 50 millimeter shot. And if you were using your 2-eye star tracker, you would be able, at that wide of a length, you'd probably be able to get, it wouldn't surprise me if you could get 3-minute exposures with no star trails without using any auto guiding. If you really took your time on polar alignment and did it right. So just wanted to follow up on that one thing, Martin, and mention that to you. Definitely, give Stellarium a try. I love opening it up when it's like a cloudy night, but I've really got an itch for astronomy. I can sit down with Stellarium and, kind of play around with various targets, plan out what I want, to look at in the future and these sorts of things. It's also a really good tool for learning the constellations. There's also a mobile version on your phone. So, for me, I really like using the desktop version of Stellarium. I'm not as big of a fan of the mobile version because the mobile version it's so similar to the desktop version. And unfortunately, the desktop version, it just isn't really made for a mobile interface, in my opinion. I personally, for mobile planetarium software, I really love Sky Safari Pro. There is a free version of it as well, and the free version's great. But if you get the Pro version, it unlocks a whole lot of extra features, and you can actually do telescope control through it as well. So I would use that whenever I get out my visual scope, my Newtonian. It's the Celestron. It's not the Star Sense. It was the model that came out a couple of years before that. But just basically, I think it was the Astrophi 130 Newtonian, or is the Astrophi Newtonian 130. And you can connect directly to the control mechanism for that telescope through Sky Safari, and then, use it for go-to functionality after you complete like a 1, 2, or 3 star alignment. So I really like Sky Safari. Definitely recommend giving that a try. And like I say, between the two of those, mobile or desktop, depending on, what you're doing, it is a really excellent way to learn the night sky and all of the constellations. I will say, pro tip though, stuff in these apps looks super duper close together. And then when you get outside, you realize something that looked really close to maybe the horizon or close to another star is actually really far apart. So if you're ever doing like star hopping and trying to find a target and looking at your space app, if you will, on your phone, just remember to look a little bit further than you would anticipate. One trick that I like to use is, we talked about using your one finger for 1 degree of the night sky and making a fist and the groovy sign and all that for finding up between 1 and 25 degrees of the night sky a few weeks ago. If you look in the top right hand corner of Sky Safari, you will see that it's giving you a description of how many degrees wide the current image that you're looking at is. So anytime that I need to know like how high off the horizon a given star is, like I'll give you an example. A few months back when Venus was first starting to reappear in the evening sky, it said that it was only 5 degrees above the horizon when I could kind of first view it in my area with a very low horizon, obviously. And by going into the app and literally, doing a pinch to zoom until I got it down to 5 degrees, I could see, okay, well, that actually shows me how far I am really. And then I combine that with, using one finger or my hand while holding it at arm's length towards the horizon to find out, how far away different objects are. I used the exact same method whenever the comet was here. See 2023 AE3 last month. Well, was it? Yeah. Last month in October it was, because Venus was kind of, the closest thing to it that everybody could very easily see in the early night sky. And then I believe Arcturus was to the right of it. And I want to say whenever it first started appearing in the night sky, it was about 25 degrees away. But when you opened it up and looked at it on the Sky Safari app, you would have sworn it was just, a few feet away from it because they just look so close together. But if you were to zoom all the way in and have Venus on the left side of your screen and then the comet on the right side of the screen, it would have told you that you're at about 25 degrees up in that top right hand corner. And then you're like, okay. So if I'm at 25 degrees on the screen here, then I know if I put my hand out at arm's length and stick my pinky finger and my thumb out like I'm, doing the rock and roll symbol or whatever, that's 25 degrees. And that's a good way to find targets when you're out in the field that maybe you're not used to seeing all the time, particularly something like a comet that's not going to be easily visible. We also had a pole that was across the street. So it was super low horizon, but there was this huge power pole that was going way up into the sky. It must have been, a good 15 degrees off of the horizon. And I was just thinking to myself the whole time, like, what if the comet ends up behind that pole and I'm sitting here the whole time looking? So, I ended up walking 100 feet down and looking behind where the pole was. But anyway, that is a little trick that I use all the time. Well, maybe not all the time, but, regularly enough to where I figured it'd be worth mentioning to you guys in case you ever need to use it yourself. In other notable astronomy news, we do have a meteor shower coming up for peak in just a few more days here. We're going to have the Leonids peaking. I believe it's peaking on the 17th this year, so it will be over this weekend. Unfortunately, it's going to be right at full moon when it's peaking. So, your results may vary if you want to go outside and see if you can catch a few of the Leonid meteors. I love meteor showers. Generally speaking, I always try to catch one if I can. If it's really good conditions, like new moon and, one of the better meteor showers that we have throughout the year, I'll usually go out to a dark sky site and bring a zero gravity chair and sit back. I probably won't be doing that with this year's Leonids just because of that full moon. If you've ever watched a meteor shower, you know that the vast majority of the meteors that you do see throughout the night are of the very faint variety. And you only get, maybe one or two, if you're lucky, of those really breathtaking bright ones on, an average meteor shower. The thing about the Leonids, though, is sometimes it can be anything but average. And actually, I wanted to talk about for just a few minutes here one of my earliest memories of astronomy. So way back in the year 2001, when Rue was just 16 years old, if you can believe that. I think I would have been 17 actually at the time I'm thinking back. So yeah, I was born in 84 August. So in November of 2001, I would have just turned 17 a few months prior. We had the last great Leonids Meteor Storm. And this was kind of, don't get me wrong, we had the internet in 2001, but we didn't have the sort of, news travels fast internet that we do these days, where, anything that's important that's happening anywhere on the world is going to be, within everyone's reach, within an hour or two of it happening. So generally speaking, we didn't hear much news about things like, awesome meteor showers that were coming by. That being said, me and a couple of my friends, we did know that there was going to be the Leonids meteor shower that night, and we had decided we were going to watch it. So we partied a little bit that night. I'm just going to leave it at that. But we went out to a field is where we kind of ended up. And the field, it actually wasn't too far from my mom's house where I was living at the time, 17 years old. And what did we bring? Some blankets, and we sat out in the field. I remember another family ended up coming by and spooked us early on in the night, but they didn't stay too long. But the number one thing I can tell you about this meteor shower is that it was unlike anything I have ever experienced in my life, and likely ever will again as far as astronomy goes. If you were lucky enough to view the 2001 Leonids, I would love to hear about your experience. So if you can, please email me about your experience at rooastrocast@gmail.com. And if you want, let me know, and I'd be happy to, if you have any interesting anecdotes to share, I'd be happy to read them on next week's show. But the main thing I can tell you guys is when you read about things like, up to 100 meteors per hour, the Leonids in 2001, and they do call it a meteor storm when this happens. They were literally everywhere you looked the whole time for a good, I want to say it peaked for about an hour, if I'm not mistaken. It might have been briefer. And like I say, it's been 20 years since it happened. I don't have any video of it or anything. I know that there are some videos online because I remember being curious about that. It's not like super high quality footage, but you can absolutely view some videos to see what I'm talking about as far as like how many were occurring. In fact, I will let me jot that down. All right, I got it in my notes to see if I can find that video of the 2001 storm. But yeah, it was nuts. So we were in a dark field, dark skies back then. Easily Bortle 4, because this was before Charlotte was anywhere near as big as it is today. Still was a big city, but we were way outside in the country of Mint Hill, North Carolina, which is pretty far outside the bright city lights. And just really perfectly clear night, and just everywhere you looked during that peak, when it actually did come, you saw one. It was like, there's one, there's one, there's one, there's one. And not only that, but, every, 10 minutes or so, you would see one of those incredible ones, like one of those really bright, long streaking, slow moving meteors go across the night sky. And that was just so surreal to witness. So it was me, and funny enough, my friend that went on the Dark Skies trip with me, Chris, he was there again, oldest friend in the world. Me and him have known each other since first grade. And then another one of our friends who unfortunately we don't really talk with much anymore these days for personal reasons that I won't get into on the show. But anyway, I hope he's doing well nonetheless. I wish him the best. But yeah, the three of us really did get to experience something truly remarkable that night. And I really hope and pray that maybe one day we will get lucky enough to have another Leonids Meteor Storm. So I'm not really sure how often they occur. Actually, I checked. It's every 33 years on average. We have another meteor storm from the Leonids, where they really break out in spectacular fashion. And sometimes it comes earlier, sometimes it comes later. As we know, astronomical events like meteor showers are notoriously hard to predict. About as lucky as picking a sun grazing comet to survive. Will it or will it not? Likely it will not. But if it's every 33 years, then we are well on our way to getting there again, since it's been 23 years since 2001, right? 24. Yeah. I'm trying to remember what year it is. I guess technically we're almost at 24 at this point. That means that we have less than 10 years to go before the next Leonids meteor storm. So I do got to say, I don't know, I guess it's hard to say. We don't know if it's going to actually, be a storm on, this date or that date or what have you. But I'll say cross your fingers that Captain Cumulus pays you a visit for that one, because man, oh man, that really is something special, seeing the Leonids Meteor Storm, if you get a chance to. All right, let's talk recommendations for this week. I've got one this week. I can't honestly remember if I may have recommended this before on a prior show. If I did, it's been a long time. And guys, forgive me if I ever repeat a recommendation. I try to do my best to keep up with these things, but now we're getting to nearly 40 episodes. So undoubtedly something that I really love will come back up in my head at some point. So that being said, this week it's going to be a book. It may be a book that you have heard of before. It is not a Stephen King novel. I know I recommend a lot of those, Stephen King being my favorite author for sure. But you might have heard of it because there was actually a really good television adaptation done for it by Hulu this past year. And that, of course, is Shogun by the late great James Clavell. So if you don't know, Shogun is a book written by James Clavell in a series that he wrote on mainly feudal Japan, but also into the modern era, depending on, which series, which book in the series you were reading. But Shogun is by far his most successful book from that series. And it was adapted back in the 70s into what some people consider to be a little bit of a campy HBO version. I believe it was in the 70s, it might have been the 80s, but they finally redid it, and they did just an excellent job with the show. If you ask me, and I think most critics would agree. But Shogun is one of those books that I actually read when I was quite younger. We're talking about when I was 17. It was probably about that age, probably 18 or 19 when I first read Shogun. And I basically gave it to all of my friends. I had this really thick paperback copy. And whenever I was done with it, I would hand it off to the next one. And when I say thick, I mean thick. We're talking like 1,300 pages to get through Shogun. Nowadays, they don't even sell it in a single book format anymore, which is a shame because I loved having that. And I think I still have my copy somewhere, but you can pick it up in part 1 and part 2 for the newly released version that came out with the show. But Shogun tells you a lot more than just a good story. It teaches you about Japanese culture in a way that few other books ever will in your life. In fact, if you're anything like myself and all of my friends that have read this book, you'll actually start speaking a little bit of Japanese, because he writes it so cleverly into the book that certain phrases you will pick up on, because the story follows an English sailor who actually crashes into Japan, and is basically kind of thrown into this culture without ever having been there before and having no knowledge of the language or anything, but he has to survive. And he's a very intelligent guy, and he has to kind of keep his wits about him and learn how to survive in a culture that is very different from his own. And it's funny because when he first arrives, without getting into any spoilers, he thinks that these people are just, nuts and they don't know how to live and they're, crazy and yada, yada, yada. But after spending enough time with them, he starts to realize that maybe, the Western culture is the ones that have it backwards, or are the ones who have it backwards. So anyway, I can't recommend Shogun highly enough if you've never read it. It's a long read. Like I say, there's no doubt about it. There's probably a reason they've broken it up into 2 books in this day and age, because so many people have, TikTok brain and just short attention spans where they can't, sit down and read a really long book. And I completely understand that. There's also a very, very good audiobook version available on Audible. I have both part 1 and part 2 of that on Audible, and I actually re-listened to it not too long ago because I wanted to be familiar with the story again before getting into the show, and I was very glad that I did. And then, just as a treat, if you haven't seen the show yet, when you're done reading the book, you can watch the show and kind of relive it all. So highly, highly recommend that you check that one out if you never have. I promise you won't regret it. And if you end up reading it, please drop me a line, rooastrocast@gmail.com, and just let me know what you thought. And before we go, I, of course, want to give a shout out to our newest member of our Patreon service. We are actually up to 14 Patreon members now, which I can't thank you guys enough for that. I remember when I started the Patreon project, I thought to myself, no one in their right minds will ever donate to help support my podcast. But sure enough, here we are, coming up on a year later, and the Patreon is alive and well. And because of that, our little community in our Discord server continues to grow. So big shout out to our newest member, Alex. Thank you so much for supporting the show, Alex. I cannot thank you enough. I know I've been super busy the last few days and we haven't had a chance to connect too much, but I give you my word, we will talk about that Rokinon 135 rig, and hopefully I can convince you that it's a task worth undertaking. Thanks again to you, Alex. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is going to just about do it for our show this week. I thank you so much for tuning in and listening. We will be back next Tuesday with a new episode. Thank you so much for listening to the Astrocast. I am your host, Rue, and as always, clear skies.